September 1940. Warsaw, occupied Poland. A man stood on a street corner in the Żoliborz district at 6 in the morning, deliberately not running. He was 39 years old. He had been a Polish cavalry officer in the September campaign of 1939. After the surrender, he had gone underground, joining one of the first resistance networks in occupied Warsaw. He had a wife. He had 2 young children. He had a small farm in the eastern provinces he had not seen in over a year. The Germans were conducting one of their periodic mass roundups. Lepanka, the Poles called it, sealing off entire neighborhoods and packing every adult male they found into trucks. Most of the men taken in these roundups were never seen again. They were sent east, to a place the occupation press was just beginning to mention by name. A converted Polish army barracks near the town of Auschwitz. The Germans had renamed it. They called it Auschwitz. The man on the corner had been told there was a roundup that morning. He had not avoided it. He had walked into it. His name was Witold Pilecki, and he was about to do something that no other documented person did during the Second World War. He was going to volunteer to be sent to Auschwitz. Witold Pilecki had been born in 1891, in what was then the Russian Empire, into a Polish family of impoverished gentry. He had grown up reading Polish history that the Russian authorities had banned. He had fought in the Polish-Soviet War of 1920 as a teenage cavalryman, earning a Cross of Valor. Between the wars he had farmed a small estate, raised a family, painted landscapes, written poetry, and served as a reserve officer in the Polish army. In September 1939, when the Germans invaded, he had commanded a cavalry platoon during the disastrous Battle of Tomaszow-Lubelski. After the surrender, he had refused to go into German captivity. He had taken his uniform off, walked back to Warsaw, and immediately joined the formation of what would become one of the largest underground organizations in occupied Europe, the Tajna Armia Polska, the secret Polish army. By the summer of 1940, the rumors from Auschwitz were starting to reach Warsaw, and the secret Polish army's leadership wanted to know what was actually happening there. They had only fragments. Men were going in. Very few were coming out. The Germans were calling it a labor camp. The smuggled letters spoke of something else. The leadership wanted an inside source, a trained officer who could organize resistance within the camp itself, gather intelligence, and report back. Pilecki had volunteered. In the truck that took him east, he sat with several hundred other men, most of them strangers, most of them terrified, none of them aware that one of them had chosen to be there. The journey took the better part of a day. The men were not given food or water. When they arrived at Auschwitz, they were herded out of the truck under the floodlights, beaten with rifle butts, made to run between 2 rows of SS guards who struck them as they passed. Pilecki was assigned prisoner number 4859. He was now, officially, Halfling Tomasz Serafiński, the false identity papers he had carried with him. He would be inside Auschwitz for 945 days. The Auschwitz of late 1940 was not yet the industrial extermination center it would become. In that early period it was primarily a concentration camp for Polish political prisoners, academics, priests, officers, resistance suspects. The mass murder of Jews on an industrial scale had not yet begun. The gas chambers had not yet been built. The death rate was high. Perhaps half the prisoners would not survive their first 6 months. But the means of death were the conventional ones of any brutal camp: starvation, disease, exposure, exhaustion, and the casual violence of guards. Pilecki, working as a laborer, began doing what he had been sent in to do. He looked, he listened, he measured, and he began to build a network. He recruited carefully. He never asked a man to join until he had watched him for weeks. He used the small, fixed cells of resistance organizations he had built in the underground in Warsaw, groups of 5, each member knowing only the others in his cell. By the spring of 1941, Pilecki had built a network inside Auschwitz that included prisoners in the kitchens, in the camp hospital, in the SS canteen, in the administrative offices, in the labor details that worked outside the wire. The network had a name: ZOW, Związek Organizacji Wojskowych, the Union of Military Organization. Its members took an oath. Pilecki wrote the oath himself. They swore to organize mutual aid among prisoners, to gather intelligence about the camp, and, when the right moment came, to rise in armed revolt with help from outside. a help that Pilecki was already arranging in his smuggled reports. The first report he managed to get out of the camp went to Warsaw in October 1940. From there, through the Polish underground, it traveled to the Polish government in exile in London. From London, it went to the British Foreign Office. It was the first detailed Allied intelligence on Auschwitz. Pilecki kept reporting. Throughout 1941 and into 1942, his network continued to smuggle information out of the camp, usually through prisoners released after short sentences, or through civilian workers from nearby villages, or through laundry vans where reports were sewn into the lining of bags of uniforms. The reports grew darker. In the spring of 1942, the first transports of Jewish prisoners began to arrive. Pilecki described in detail the first selections on the railway ramp. He described the construction of the new gas chamber facilities at Birkenau, 2 miles from the main camp. He described the smoke from the crematoria. His reports asked repeatedly for an Allied bombing of the camp or for a large-scale Polish underground attack to break the prisoners out. Neither would come. The reports reached London. The British and American governments, who had reason by mid-1942 to believe what they said, took no major action against Auschwitz specifically. The reasons for this strategic, logistical, political are still debated by historians. Pilecki never received an explanation. By the spring of 1943, with the resistance network in place but no outside relief in sight, Pilecki concluded that the only remaining way he could help was to escape, reach Warsaw, and argue his case in person. He escaped with 2 other prisoners on the night of April 26, 1943. The escape itself was almost gentle by the standards of the camp. Pilecki had managed to get himself transferred to a small detail of prisoners who worked night shifts at a bakery in the town of Auschwitz itself, just outside the camp wire. On the chosen night, the 3 men finished their shift, cut the telephone wires, broke open a side door of the bakery, and walked away. They had no food, no maps, and no contacts outside the camp. They moved at night, hid by day, walked east toward the Vistula and the territory of the Polish underground. Pilecki's geography was excellent. After several days, they reached a safe house in the village of Tyniec, near Krakow. From there, through underground channels, Pilecki was sent on to Warsaw. In Warsaw, he wrote what he had seen. The full report, completed in 1943, ran to about 100 pages. It is one of the most important documents of the war. It describes in clear, restrained prose the structure of Auschwitz, the mass murder of Jews, the conditions of forced labor, the work of the gas chambers, the names of specific SS officers and what they had done. The Polish underground sent the report to London. Where it went from there, and how widely it was read, is again a question historians still cannot answer with certainty. Pilecki, in the meantime, returned to active resistance work. He fought in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, leading a company of soldiers in the Old Town district. When the uprising failed, he was captured by the Germans and sent to a prisoner of war camp in Bavaria. He survived the war. What came after the war is, perhaps, the cruelest part of the story. In 1945, Poland was liberated by the Soviet Red Army and immediately fell under a communist government installed by Stalin. The new government considered the former officers of the Polish Home Army, the underground resistance movement Pilecki had served, to be enemies of the state. They were arrested, persecuted, and in many cases executed. Pilecki, who had returned to Poland in late 1945 to continue his intelligence work, this time gathering evidence of Soviet crimes for the Polish government in exile in London, was arrested by the Polish secret police in May 1947. He was interrogated for nearly a year. The interrogation, by his own later testimony, was more difficult to bear than anything he had experienced in Auschwitz. He was beaten, denied sleep, and tortured for weeks at a time. His ribs were broken. Several of his fingernails were pulled out. When his wife visited him in prison, she did not recognize him. He told her quietly, Auschwitz was easy by comparison. In March 1948, he was put on trial in a closed military court, accused of espionage on behalf of foreign powers and conspiracy against the Polish state. The trial lasted 3 days. He was sentenced to death. He was executed by a single pistol shot to the back of the head on the 25th of May 1948 in the basement of Mokotów prison in Warsaw. He was buried in an unmarked grave, somewhere in the prison cemetery. The location, to this day, is not certain. For more than 40 years, Witold Pilecki's name could not be spoken in Poland. The communist government suppressed every mention of him. The 100-page report he had written about Auschwitz was classified. His widow and children were forbidden to discuss his case. His grave was not marked. It was only in 1989, when the communist regime collapsed, that the documents began to emerge. His conviction was posthumously overturned in 1990. His Auschwitz report was published in Polish in 2000. In 2012, an English translation was published in the United States. He is now slowly becoming known outside Poland. There is a statue of him in Warsaw. There is a small memorial in the courtyard of the camp at Auschwitz, which is now the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. There are streets named after him in cities across Poland, and a few in cities elsewhere in Europe. But for most of the world, even now, the name Witold Pilecki is not the name people know. The man who walked into Auschwitz on purpose, who built an underground army inside the wire, who wrote one of the first detailed reports of the Holocaust, and who was murdered by his own countrymen for the crime of telling the truth about Soviet rule, is still mostly a footnote. He should not be a footnote. He should be one of the names we know. And now perhaps you do.